Up to now, we learned what makes a dough into bread and makes the blessing to be hamotzi. Now we'll ask an opposite question. What makes bread, after it was already bread, to become mezonos? Can we take bread and do to it something that will change the bracha and make it to be mezonos? So obviously we can change bread, and we can think of quite a few ways to change bread. The first way is to make breadcrumbs. We dry out the bread and crumble it up, so it's crumbs. The second way, we soak the bread in water, we take the breadcrumbs and put inside honey and stick all the crumbs together. And the last way that really changes the bread, we cook the bread. So we have 3 levels of changing the bread. Crumbling it up, sticking the crumbs together with honey or whatever, and cooking the bread. Let's go one by one and learn the halacha. Crumbling the bread, well, usually when we eat bread, we take a big piece of bread and cut it to pieces. So there's no real difference between cutting the bread into big pieces or to crumbs. It's bread just cut into very fine pieces. So breadcrumbs, the blessing will always be hamotzi. Usually we don't eat breadcrumbs on their own, we eat it in a different formation, and the blessing will change as we will learn. But if you feel like taking breadcrumbs and eating them as they are, the blessing will be hamotzi. What happens if I take those breadcrumbs and mix them up with honey, and I stick them together, or I soak them with something? So there's another ingredient here which also helps to change the way that bread looks like, liquid or something else which changes this bread. So here, there's a change in the bread. It's not a big change, it wasn't cooked, but there's a change in the bread. We will say hamotzi if 1 out of 2 things exist. If there's one piece there that has at least a kazait, an amount of olive, we'll say hamotzi. Even if it doesn't look like bread. But if there's a piece that looks like that it's the size of an olive, a kazais, we'll say hamotzi. If it's smaller than a kazais, if you look at it and see it still has the shape of bread, so you'll still say hamotzi. For example, if I take breadcrumbs and mix them up with honey, all of the pieces are less than a kazais, and I look at it, I don't know it's made out of bread, it doesn't have the shape of bread, so the blessing will be mezonos. The last way of changing the bread will be cooking the bread. For example, on Pesach, many of us like to eat knedelach, which is matzah, bread, that is grounded up and cooked. We have a lot of other foods we make from cooking bread, and that is the greatest way of changing the bread, by cooking it in water or in other liquid. In that case, we say hamotzi only if there is a kazait in this piece of bread or in one of the pieces of the bread. If there is no kazais, so we will not say hamotzi. That brings us to quite a common question. If you like French toast or bread dipped in eggs, milk, and then you fry it. How do we view frying? Do we view frying like as cooking? And then if you have small pieces, so the blessing will be mezonos? Or do we view frying like the second level we mentioned, like baking, like mixing it up with a mixture without cooking it, and then as soon as we have 1 out of 2 criterias, or a kazais, or the shape of bread, then we'll say hamotzi. So there's an argument between the rabbis how to view frying. Lemaise, if you're making a French toast with bread dipped in egg and milk and you fry it, you should make sure that at least one of the pieces has a kazait. And as we learned, even when you cook bread, if one of the pieces has a kazait, you'll say hamotzi. So let's summarize the 3 levels and the halacha for each level. The first level, making breadcrumbs, it will always be hamotzi. Breadcrumbs is just small pieces of bread. The second level is mixing it up with liquid honey or something else. You'll say hamotzi if there's 1 out of 2 criteria. It all looks like bread, it has the shape of bread, or it has a kazait in one of the pieces. And the third level is when you cook the bread, then you really make a transformation from bread to something else. And the only time we will say hamotzi on it is if the pieces have a kazait in them. If there's no one piece, if one of the pieces does not have a kazait on it, and you eat it, so the blessing will be mezonos.